Welcome to our May monthly music club meeting. We're really excited to have two amazing artists join us today. We have Stephanie Curcio and Luisa Rayan.
How's that?
And they are going to be joining us today to talk about two works that they have written. But before we get started, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping, make a few announcements. Hopefully you have joined us before, but we meet once a month and we invite harpists to learn one of two pieces that we've chosen for the month. One of them is specifically appropriate for lever harp and the other for pedal harp. And this month, we have Stephanie Curcio's Ribbons and Maria Luisa Rayan's arrangement of three gymnopédies and nocions. So we're really excited. We got great music to get through today. So really excited you're here. And I also just wanted to make a note that if you like this and you want to join us again, for next month, we'll be announcing the June monthly music club pieces here in the next couple weeks. So make sure that you are signed up to receive our announcements. I'm going to put the sign up in the chat. So make sure you sign up. It's free to get these emails, free to join the monthly music club. The only thing that you have to pay for is the music, which is great because it supports our fellow harpists. So we should go ahead and get started because we're already a few minutes behind and we have a lot to get through today. We will start with, I think we'll start with Maria Luisa Rayan. Let me give you just a brief introduction. I mean, I think a lot of people are already familiar with you, Maria Luisa, but let's give them a little bit of a tiny background on your bio. You're internationally renowned harpist. You first made your appearance on stage at age 11 in a concert organized by UNICEF at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. She later went on to win silver medals at the USA International Harp Competition in both 1998 and 2001. And since then, she's come to be recognized as one of today's sought-after harpists, as a recitalist, chamber musician, soloist, teacher, and arranger of harp music. She's recorded 2 CDs. Is that right? 2 CDs?
Yeah, there are other ones,
I was
but
going to say, I
they
thought
were
you had
different
more.
labels and whatever,
Just a few more, no big deal. Yeah. But I will put Luisa's links to her music that's available on Harp Pelham Music, as well as her studio on Harp Pelham Academy, where she's one of our master teachers, as well as an interview that we had with her in Harp Pelham Magazine a long time ago, about 15 years ago. I'll put
Was
all
it like
those.
20 years ago?
I know, it's hard to believe, right? I'll put those links in the chat if anybody wants to look more into her music or her teaching. But I thought we would just start by maybe having you talk a little bit about why you chose, you have a lot of arrangements of different music, a lot of French music, but a lot of music that's written originally for piano. So I wanted first to just give us a little background about why you chose these pieces to
Okay.
arrange.
Yeah, so Sati, well, hello everyone. I'm super excited you could join us today and talk about Sati. And after I give the intro, I really want to think of some questions that you have that you think could help you in your playing if you're familiar with these pieces or you're thinking about playing them. So why did I choose Sati? I chose Sati. I always kind of go with like my guts. I trust my guts a lot. And that means I just love this music. Okay. And it's music that is deeply emotional. So usually, let's put more like the rational. So that's one part, the emotional part. The rational part is that I love teaching. And so in my teaching, I like to explore new ways, not necessarily new ways of playing. I'm not reinventing the harp technique, but rather approach the playing with music we don't have necessarily that can explore different things. So for instance, in Sati, what did I want to explore there? And when I teach it with to my students, it's the depth of the sound the sustainability of the sound. As many of you might know, I am obsessed about sound production. And so these pieces are very challenging. The slower you play on the harp, the harder it is to sustain phrasing and to really produce really, really good sounds that sound very legato. So that's the, like the rational part of that. And so I kind of like to fill a little bit of the gap with repertoire we don't have in the harp. And just because composers didn't write for the harp doesn't mean we cannot play them, okay? So that's my motto. If we don't have it, we arrange it and we make it suitable for the harp. And another component is that we have all these really amazing, fantastic harp composers that know how to write for the harp or knew how to write for the harp. I'm talking specifically in the 1800s, 1900s, your Tournier, Paris Chalvars, Godefroy, all those really amazing composers, Salcedo, I mean, Renier. Um, the breadth of repertoire we have. So we have that, we're covered. So I just wanted to explore something new. And then regarding Satie, I just feel he's a really funny dude. Um, he was a nutcase, as they say. I mean, he must have had all sorts of psychiatric conditions, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed. And he actually had a really rough life, a very, very rough life. But uh, in spite of that, or also because of that, he created really amazing music. And for instance, if you were to ask me, oh, can you tell me, Luisa, what the words gymnopédie and nocien mean? They actually mean nothing. They're made up words. They don't mean anything. They are, in his world, in his head. And so that's I always go, I mentioned with my guts, and my guts are usually my emotional brain and my emotional part. And then I go with my analytical brain, which is, okay, so what do I want to achieve in these arrangements? That kind of sums it up.
That's really helpful, and I really appreciate that you pointed out the titles of these pieces and the kind of lack of definition. These are really, really interesting, kind of different compositions. One thing that I think if anybody is playing this or have played these pieces that they notice is that
Yeah.
Nociens does not have a meter. Oh, sorry, does not
Yes.
have meter. And so can you talk a little bit about how as a harpist you approach a piece without meter?
Yes, how do I do it? So I'm looking at the music right now. So for instance, like we're looking at the first nocien. Yeah, it's like there are no divisions, there are no measures. We just go. And we have the pedals and we have your quarter notes and your half notes and your eighth notes, but otherwise we don't have a meter. What I try to do in my arrangements, as I mentioned, since I use them for me because it's music I deeply love, but also for pedagogical reasons, then I go a little bit beyond and I mark things on the score that are not originally in the score. And I do this a lot for different stylistic periods that I arrange. For instance, here what I do is, so it says that it's slow. Okay, so I put slow, but I always in my pieces put a tempo marking. So I give you an idea of what it's supposed to be, which is always flexible, but it really gives an idea of, okay, so then I will stay with this. And in terms of not having your specific question, Alison, that it doesn't have a meter. It's not in 3/4, it's not in 4/4. All I know that I have my quarter notes and my half notes and my eighth notes. I know what the duration of those are. And basically the piece is a very long measure. So you just take it that way. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have punctuations, that it doesn't have phrasings, that it doesn't have a beginning and end to a phrase. It does, but it just doesn't have meters. So I am sure that someone from the Enlightenment time, so let's talk about a Mozart, right? A classical composer would look at this and go, what the frick? What is this music, right? It's like, what is this music without meter? So my approach is more like, okay, so here I give you this. And what's interesting about Satie, he gave descriptions throughout the piece. So for instance, looking at the first nocien, okay, the beginning is slowly. On the second page, it says very shining. Talk about an instruction for interpretation. Okay, whatever very shining is for me might be different for you, but that gives you a framework. Then the next line says questioning. And really, it's like you're questioning what you're playing comes as a question. Another one, this is my favorite, on the tip of the thought. I love that one. It's like, what am I thinking? So it's like, is my phrase coming? Do I want to say what I want to say? So he gives you this and the other one, on the tip of the tongue. The other one is ask yourself, what are you doing here? So it's like the phrasing is like, okay, depending on what kinds of conversations you have with yourself, your ask yourself could be it's like, okay, this is very stern. Or maybe for some of you might be like more gentle. So that is the world of Sati and the beauty of Sati.
Yeah, it's so interesting. All of those markings, and how many of those
Yes,
markings there are throughout the
yes,
piece. Yeah. I do appreciate that you translated all of the markings that he gave in there. So if you don't speak French, you know what he said, which is very helpful. So thanks for that. So another question that I had people might have is you have a lot of markings in this piece, dampening,
mhm,
um, and all of those stylistic things that Satie noted, that you've translated. Um, and then there's a lot of grace notes in the Nociens. So
yes.
can you tell us a little bit about how specific you were in your notation for the harp and how to do that?
Yes. So in terms of the interpretation, so the translation of, in a sense of Sati towards the harp, I didn't put too many crazy things. Okay. Stay more with the translation of his French of what they mean. So you get an idea. As I mentioned, tempi marking. Oh, and I do a lot dynamic levels because, for instance, you take a piece by Bach and we do use phrasing crescendi, decrescendi, piano, forte, but in the original scores, they are not marked. And so we need to, so for someone that is new to this music, someone that has never played Satie on the harp, then it's like, what do you do? So you need to give a guidance. So that's what I do. What is the biggest thing for me, as you were saying, Alison, like the grace notes and this and that, and sound production, what I do with my left hand is fingering. Fingering is crucial. I choose my fingerings to the service of the music and the phrasing I want. And it can be different, right? For different parts of the same score.
Mhm.
Now, I'm not absolutely married to my fingerings. I have evolved, like sometimes I evolve over time. So if I publish something with certain finger, maybe 10 years later, I may be doing something different. But at the time, I thought that that's what was the best. I have some things about fingering is that one thing I teach, especially like my younger students, and they're dumbfounded every time I tell them this. If the more you disconnect your fingerings, the more legato is going to be in certain circumstances. And they're like, what? Am I not supposed to connect all my 4, 3, 2, 1? No, because sometimes you're actually muffling the sounds by reconnecting and saying you think you're going to be more legato, and it cuts the phrase. So that's one of the things that is very important for me. And the other one is the position of the finger. So I have some fingerings I tell my students, I love it when people come up with their own fingerings that can also be great solutions. But if I feel very strongly about a fingering that I know there's only one option for, sometimes there's really one option only that it sounds the best for a certain part, I tell them, I appreciate that you're being proactive with fingerings, but this one is non-negotiable. And I'm a very open person, but when I go like that, it's like, no, this one, I am convinced that this is the only way. But otherwise, I let people explore their own. Now, I've had people come to Piazzolla, for instance, in my arrangements with a different finger. I'm like, actually, that's fabulous. I like it. I'm going to take it too. So, it works both ways. But so fingerings to me, fingerings in so specifically in Satie right now is because the importance of these pieces is to be able to produce the most amazing sound and the legato phrasing, which is really hard sometimes for us. The sustainability of sound in piano is like you press the key and it sustains. For us, you press, it's already released. You play, it's already released. So how you do it is very important. So I play around a lot with the position of the fingers, especially in the left hand.
That's really helpful, and it kind of got to the next question that I had, which is, with as important as sound and keeping that sound sustaining through these longer notes is in these pieces. Other than fingering, do you have any suggestions for how harpists can practice getting their sound to sustain through these pieces?
Yes. I think number one is to know exactly, to listen very attentively in their practice to understand. First of all, make a decision. You go to your practice as it's not what comes out, but rather, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to achieve. This is what I want. I want sustainability in my sound. In this case, because it's slow, the work I would suggest is that you do work literally looking at your fingers. For instance, like focus on your right hand and use all your senses to see what you're doing technically. So watch what you're doing, feel how your hand is closing. So as you watch that, okay, it's closing this much, it feels like this. When I'm doing that movement, it feels like this. Then listen attentively. Is this what I want? Is this the type of sound I want? And just in a sense, it's kind of torture process. It's like never be satisfied. A little bit, okay, not always. Just a little bit. It's like only just to look, because what happens is that when you say you don't know the type of sound you're looking for, right? You're learning it, so you don't know. However, when you do achieve it, like you change your sound, you do hear the difference. Okay. So you're going to work it through your technique, through your articulation, through your pressure, through your release. So it's really all the parts of the sound production. And then it's singing internally as well. What is the melody? How am I singing? The voice is super expressive. So singing internally and really your hands are part of your singing and your singing radiates through your fingers. So that's more on the metaphysical part or of the harp playing, but otherwise on the practical side would be it has to do with your sound production, your approach, articulation of the strings and release.
That's really helpful. And if anybody is interested in learning more to Luisa's specific approach to sound production, she has some fabulous lessons, video lessons on Harp Column Academy in her studio, and I've put that link in the chat if anybody wants to check those out. They're really, really good. Okay, and if anybody has a question specific to this music or anything else for Luisa, make sure you put it in the chat. One last question I had for you is, well, it's kind of a two-part question. First, if harpists enjoyed these arrangements of yours, what would you suggest that they try next in terms of the arrangements that you have? And then the second question I have is, do you have any new arrangements in the works?
Okay, I'll answer the second question since it's like the latest. So I actually had arranged a lot of Argentinian music. They are like very well-known composers for there, but it was a little bit for some reason they made it really complicated with the copyrights, and I'm always very respectful. Like I don't go behind them back and publish them anyway. So I have all of those sitting there. They are, typeset and everything, but they cannot be out. So that's that. And in terms of what they would like to do next. Okay, so it depends on their level, depends on their interest, if they want slow, if they want fast, if they want minor keys. So I'm going to tell you based on what I like. And I know I've used the same expression before, but this is the truth. I'm a sucker for minor keys. I just love minor keys. I like to vary up too, right? I put the major keys, but
Yeah.
um, just like it's like so gut-wrenching the minor keys. So of course I would say Bach. And the reason I would pick Bach right now, it's also because I do have a wide array of levels. So I have the very easy pieces, like the minuet, like super easy. And then some of the preludes, but not the wall temper clavier preludes, but other preludes that are a step up from the minuets, but they're still easy. And then a few of the preludes from the wall temper clavier, and of course those are mostly minor keys. Whatever. And then there are the three partitas as well. Those are like my favorite. Um, well, I don't know. Seem to have a lot of favorites. So, Bach, yeah, for sure.
Favorites are fine, and I have to agree with you. I am also a sucker for pieces in minor keys, which is probably part of the reason that I love your music so much. Well, that's great. Luisa, I don't have any further questions. Is there anything else you wanted to add about this music or anything else?
Yeah, I think that for me in my head, each of these pieces has its own mood completely, and I do have a little fantasy world for each of them, or little fantasy like emotions that they trigger. And so and actually they're not only minor keys, like the Gymnopédie, they are more in major keys. So like create your own fantasy world of what those pieces mean for you to really play them out with your heart.
I love that. I love that. That's a good thought to end on. Thank you so much, Luisa. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
We are going to move on to Stephanie Curcio's piece, Ribbons. Welcome, Stephanie. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi there. Hi there.
I'm sure that you are well known to most everybody in the harp world, but I'll just give a brief bio. Stephanie's lengthy music career has included performing as a soloist in ensembles, as an orchestral musician, as well as working as a teacher, arranger, and composer. She began her studies with Lucille Lawrence and later studied with Carlos Salcedo, both privately and at the Camden Harp Colony. Today, her arrangements and compositions are recognized and performed internationally. We carry many of them on Harp Column Music, and I will put a link to all of the titles of Stephanie's that we carry in the chat in just a moment. But I think you're probably best known to harpists around the world for your many original compositions and arrangements. So we're thrilled to have you here today to talk about ribbons.
Thank you. Can we just check one thing? I found what you asked me for.
Oh, okay.
Does
Oh,
that,
we're still not hearing, unfortunately, we're still not hearing the sound. You want to try it one more time?
you're not hearing it at all?
No.
Because I found the original sound for musicians and it's off.
Okay, try turning it on. It should be on.
That's where we were before. Hang on one second. I have to get back to settings. Um, it was well buried, trust me.
Yes, we're I think as we have gotten further from the pandemic in these online meetings, I know that I am getting pretty rusty at setting up these the sound for these Zoom meetings because they keep changing all the settings. So it's one
Yeah,
place.
well, it's a new computer and a new um hang on, I'm looking.
Yeah, that's fine. In the meantime, I'm
Well, in the meantime, let's just not bother. I can work without it. No problem.
okay.
Um, First of all, I would just love to thank so much, Mary Louisa, for her talking so much about in sound and interpretation. Um, it is so very important. And you talked about having visions in your head. I remember having a very, very gifted young harpist who right now I think is the harpist to the San Francisco Ballet. When she was around 5 when she started with me. And when we started talking about interpreting music, my studio was very much in the woods, and there were some deer outside, and I had her envision the afternoon of a fawn and the deer out there, and it made a huge difference to the way she played. So I appreciate so much your concern about the quality of the interpretation. I'm going to take our session here back to one of the earlier levels. For centuries, etudes have been used as a tool of teaching, etude being the French word for studies. When I wrote my very, very first edition of Student Harpist, I would present a musical idea or a technique, and then I would have a little study, an etude. I found very quickly that the students responded so much better if those little etudes had a name. And so a lot of the early level stuff that I do for just people to play has also focused on being little etudes, and ribbons is one of those. Um, it is a study on seventh chords and inversions. Now, when I teach, I start out with chords discussing the triad, which is the basic chord, which on the harp is so much easier than on a keyboard, simply because all of our flats and sharps and whatever are in our levers or pedals. So a triad is essentially one note, a skip note, and a skip note. It is played with 3, 2, and 1. Now you may not be able to hear what I'm playing, but I'm simply playing a G, B, D. This gives us what is called on the harp a hand form. And as a student is developing and learning, if you can learn what the feeling of that hand form is, you can put it on any set of notes at all. And you have a triad. Now, either hand, by the way. Okay. A triad can be inverted. The members of a triad, no matter what triad it is, are the root note, which is the name of the triad, the third, which is a third above the root, and the fifth, which is a fifth above the root. And no matter what order we play those notes in, they maintain their identity as the root, the third, and the fifth. So when we invert, we have the third, the fifth, and the root, which is now transposed up an octave. And it is not a skip, it's a double skip apart. So the third, a skip to the fifth, and a double skip to the root. In our second inversion, we start on the fifth of the chord, but we use our fourth finger. The reason for that being, for the double skip between D and G, in this case, is much more easily accessed with 4, 2, and 1. Does it always have to be played that way? No, but it's a hand form. And one of the things I found early on in teaching is that when students used to use 3, 2, 1 for both inversions, they were making mistakes everywhere. Once they learned to identify the hand form of a 4, 2, 1 and a double skip and a skip, the accuracy became much greater. So now we come to the seventh chord. Now the seventh chord, let's start with that G chord again, has the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh. Now, again, 4 notes, 4 fingers, right? Interestingly, if we start on the third of the chord, play the fifth, then the seventh and the root, which is now an octave higher, form a next door neighbors, which I like to call a doublet. The seventh and the root. So, and that is a very identifying thing for a student, for instance, to know what chord they're playing, and also to form the hand form where the doublet is at the top. In the next inversion, you're on the fifth, the seventh, the root, and the third. So the doublet is in the middle. And finally, the doublet is at the bottom, the seventh, the root, the third, and the fifth. Again, fortunately, this is far easier on the harp than it is on any form of keyboard, because we don't have to choose between black and white notes, which are on different planes of the hand. Um, Now, ribbons starts off by just simply taking, Allison, can you hear this at all?
We can hear a little bit, but we can't really hear the quality of sound.
Well, can you hear?
Sort of. We can hear about half the notes.
Half the notes. Okay. Well, all right. What I'm basically doing in the ribbons is taking an inversion of a G7 chord, playing it 3 times, and then the fourth time I am playing it down and coming back up. And I'm doing them fairly slowly, hopefully to get the notes to come out. Um, Ascending, I learned very early on in my teaching career, is a little harder for people than it is descending. So in ribbons, you have descending seventh chords, and then they go down and they come back up, and that gives you that practice of going in both directions. Another thing that makes a piece of music interesting, I think, and apparently most of my students have thought, is to have a contrasting section. In the contrasting section here in ribbons, I'm taking the left hand and using a different kind of a chord. I'm using a C chord, which is C, E, G, and I'm going root 5, and the third of the chord is up an octave, which is a tenth above the root. And that's a root 510. Very, very common in accompaniments. Here, it's a little too big, so there's a dot above the G because it's a G7, but it's expanded out. G on the bottom, F, B. And then there is a melody above that. The rest of that section uses forms of seventh chords. And it puts a melody over the top of it. The last section of the piece repeats section A and then adds an ending, a coda. I also find that if people understand the construct of a piece, early students obviously, it really helps them to access it. Okay. Now, unfortunately, because you cannot hear it, I can't do this today with you, but after the student has gotten all the technical parts of this and has trained the hand to the various forms or shapes, the next thing has to be creating a piece of music out of this. It's called ribbons. It should have a flow. It should, now, Maria talked a lot about phrasing. Phrasing is a tricky thing in harp because sometimes it's used one way, sometimes it's used another. But essentially, a phrase is a musical idea. And you can sense a phrase by the structure of the music. For instance, in ribbons, again, I wish you could hear it, but it's one. And it can flow from the beginning to the end of that idea. The end of the idea you can simply sense when it goes down, up, and has a little bit of a time break there. And then it goes to the next one. I think there are usually, at least not, certainly not with the most advanced, but even so, I think we can look at our music in 2 different ways. Technically, to make it correct and clean and with good solid tone, and then to make it shape into something that expresses. For instance, the middle of ribbons says moderate waltz tempo, and it will dance if you play it properly. Again, I can't give you an example, but if you'll go online, I believe Allison arranged for one of the staff to make a recording. I can't do this anymore. The hands are too arthritic and they just don't do what they're told. Okay. Um, an interesting follow-up for ribbons might be the Nutcracker cadenza. It's all built on an A7 chord with its inversions. and that would be a great follow-up. In the earlier parts, when you're working with just triads and their inversions, the Nightfall Suite was designed to be 3 pieces using triads and inversions. And again, into a suite of pieces for, depicting a young child, Lullaby, Starshine, and Reverie. And those are also beautiful studies in chords. Okay.
Thanks, Stephanie. You you really covered a lot of ground and actually answered a lot of the questions that I already had and I was going to ask you, which is fabulous. This is fabulous and very thorough. Um, so one question, you really literally answered all 5 of the questions I had, but one question that I will ask you that I asked Maria Luisa is, do you have anything planned to arrange or compose that's coming out? I know you did write Bright Spot, which is
Yes.
was published in Harp Column last year as our tear up tune. I think, oh gosh, last
No,
summer maybe.
I have to be honest with you, Allison. I'm not sure that there's going to be too much coming. I am 86, okay. And I was hoping to do something for a big harp ensemble on the theme of One World for the mixed American Harp Society World Harp Congress. But where it's in Canada, I'm not so sure we're even going to be invited. Um, I'm still thinking on that.
Great. Yeah, you do have. If anybody's not familiar with Stephanie's full body of work, please check out her website, which we put a link to that in the chat. But she has written so much, not just for solo harp, but for harp ensemble.
Yes,
Repertory.
I've really focused a lot on ensembles because I know people love to play together, and I think it's a fun and a wonderful experience, and I know I've loved it. So,
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. Well, yes, we are all the beneficiaries of your prolific composing and arranging career. So we thank you
Thank
for
you.
that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. That I didn't have any further questions for you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we end our time here?
No, I think the big thing that um, I'm very big with, I think similarly to Mary Louisa, is music is playing the harp is not just an execution of notes accurately. It is not, and I was interested to hear her speak about the way you use your hands to make different sounds. It is not, it does not serve just a technique. Technique is a servant to sound. It is our tool for accomplishing the sound we want. And I do feel that different types of music require a different usage of the hands. As you can tell, probably from my background, I was brought up by um, I Lucille and Carlos Salcedo, Lucille Lawrence and Carlos Salcedo. I experienced a huge amount of prejudice there because they were building a technique, and I was not even allowed to know much about the European technique. I will tell you a funny story. There was a harpist named Marie Miller. I was a poor kid when I lived in New York. Marie Miller was married to a big movie mogul. She lived in a sunken apartment on Fifth Avenue, sunken living room apartment. It was just astounding to me. I was a promising student and I did not have a harp. I had the harp that was at my high school, and she wanted to find somebody for her smaller harp, her what we would call, I guess now, a semi-grand. And I was interviewed, and she gave me her harp. Not gave me, she sold my that harp to my father for whatever he could afford, which was not much. And it sits right now in my studio. It was rebuilt by Howard Bryant. Can you see it? That's the harp. I called it magic. And she gave me on top of that, I don't know if you can see them, a huge number of her harp antiquities that I wrote, and her entire repertoire of music, which contained a huge amount of French school music. I was told to throw it away. It's all junk, which I didn't. And it has been a trove of fabulous learning for me over the years, which I've shared with my students. So there you go.
Wow, that's an amazing story, definitely. Thanks for sharing that. Well, I'll bring Maria Luisa back here just so we can thank her and say goodbye. Anything else you wanted to add, Maria Luisa?
No, I just love hearing the stories rather of Am I? No, I'm not muted. Of Stephanie, because it reminds me, right, of my teacher and all that wealth. I always talk with one of my friends, harpist, who's on the jury of the USA right now, Marcela, about
Yes.
the older generations of harpists that have so much depth and wealth of knowledge that we lack because we weren't exposed to that, and that's our aim with her and like with the academy we have in Argentina, to just have people not just play because they play the harp, but to really understand this whole concept and how detailed you were in the in your triads, in how you make everything. Like these days many people don't even know the names of those things.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes.
My book, American Harpist, may be of interest because I
It fits.
lived through the beginnings of harp in
Mhm.
America, the harp culture. Yes,
Oh,
there were harpists before that, but
uh-huh.
I lived it in
Oh,
New
thank
York.
you. Yeah.
It was fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's all in my book, American Harpist.
So going back, because we come from a lineage somewhere, right? And I think it's
Exactly.
important to always hold on to that and pass it on. Be innovative, but I think the past gives us a lot of things.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing all of that.
Thank you for it.
I love that. Thank you both for being here and for such thoughtful observations, both about your music and about the harp world. It's been just really lovely to have you both here. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you for the
Allison.
opportunity, Allison. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you all for joining us. We hope we see you next month at our June monthly music club. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.